It's not very often that I cover other power sports outside of the two-wheeled realm. We have talked about three-wheelers a fair bit, and that's mainly because I grew up on them. But for me, other types of ATVs just weren't really a part of my childhood, despite the fact that we owned our fair share of random motorized fun, from golf carts to an old Jawa moped to, well, a snowmobile. The main thing I remember about riding snowmobiles as a kid, aside from that unique floating feeling, is that they feel very fast. Like a boat, 30 miles per hour doesn't feel like 30 miles per hour, it feels more like 50. I also think of snowmobiles as a kind of escape. Winter, especially for those of us growing up in the Midwest, well, it feels never-ending, and as the deep drifts of sadness turn gray and frozen through February and March and sometimes April, it's hard not to literally feel stuck, like this is no longer a land meant to be traversed. That's where snowmobiles come in. They transform this depressing environment into a playground of sorts. Snowmobiles were such a part of American culture, especially in the Midwest and North, that in 1992, my birth year, a customized snowmobile was ridden around the field during the Super Bowl halftime show. Beyond just recreation, I've always been fascinated by performance-oriented snowmobiles. The thought of going 100 plus miles per hour on a snowmobile, on unpredictable terrain or semi-frozen water, it's just sort of unfathomable. Well, today we're looking at perhaps the most legendary performance snowmobile of all time, the ridiculous two-stroke triple Ski-Doo Mach Z, one of the craziest and perhaps one of the most dangerous off-road vehicles of all time. Now, before we get too far into the story, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by Raycon. When I'm in the garage working on a bike like this 73 XL250 that I recently picked up, I want something in the background, music, podcasts, whatever, but I don't want bulky headphones getting in the way. That's why I've been using these Raycon Essential Open Earbuds. Right now, for Raycon's anniversary, their Essential Open Earbuds are 30% off. Now, these are different from regular earbuds. The open ear design means that I can still hear what's going on around me, whether it's tools running or, someone talking or my kids playing. But I still get that clear, powerful audio. They're lightweight, super comfortable, and the multi-angle hook design keeps them in place even when I'm moving around my garage. Battery life is fantastic too, up to 36 hours with the case, so I can go all week in the garage without thinking about charging. And like all Raycon products, you're getting premium sound at about half the price of other big brands. Backed by over 3 million customers and a 30-day happiness guarantee, make sure to check them out, hit the link in the description, or go to buyraycon.com/BartOpen to get 30% off the Essential Open Earbuds. That's buyraycon.com/BartOpen. It helps out the channel, and I think you'll really like them. I've been a Raycon fan for years. They're pretty much all I use. So big thanks to them for sponsoring this video, and let's jump back in. The roots of snowmobiling stretch back to the late 1920s when inventors like Carl Eliason of Saner, Wisconsin, built early motor toboggans such as the Frigid Flyer. These were crude but effective. Essentially, they were sleds with treads and skis bolted on. Through the 30s and 40s, Eliason's designs evolved and the idea spread into places like Canada, but the breakthrough came really in the 50s when Bombardier of Quebec took the concept mainstream, with mass-produced sleds that were light, affordable, and reliable. Ski-Doo essentially created the modern snowmobile market. By the early 1960s, the name Ski-Doo had become almost synonymous with snowmobiles, much like Kleenex is for tissues. Once they started making snowmobiles accessible, this sport exploded. In '65, Wisconsin's forestry department built the first official public snowmobile trail in Three Lakes, and within just a few years, the state had more trail mileage than interstate highways. Ski-Doo's success pushed competitors like Polaris, Arcticat, and Yamaha into the field, fueling rapid innovation. Clubs sprang up across North America, organizing rides, building trail systems, and lobbying for land access. At the same time, racing took hold, most famously at the Eagle River World Championship Derby, first run in '64. While many small makers came and went, it was Ski-Doo that really remained at the center, pioneering not just the machines themselves, but also just the culture of recreational snowmobiling. Now, the mid-1980s marked a kind of revival in interest in snowmobiling, and especially in terms of performance. Ski-Doo's options in that space were the Formula MX and Formula Plus. These were roughly 500cc two-stroke twins, making decent power but weighing in at over 500 pounds. For companies like Ski-Doo and Arctic-Cat and Polaris, there was no resting on their laurels. Ski-Doo in particular was under pressure from their riders to make more powerful options. And so in '89, they released the Mach 1, but that was really just still designed for trail riding, not incredible speed and performance. Still, it was advanced with features like variable exhaust valves, something that was really a first at this time. Despite its smaller engine, the 583 was able to go toe-to-toe with the 650s from rival brands. The engine laid the groundwork for this Mach name. From '89 through '92, the 583 powered models really carried Ski-Doo's performance banner and established the DNA that would define the Mach series. Now, the first Mach Z arrived in '93. Up until then, Ski-Doo had no triple in its lineup. Riders were asking for one, so Ski-Doo answered with the 670 triple. It was sleek, powerful, and exactly what fans had been waiting for. More than just filling in a gap, it gave enthusiasts a sled that they could be proud of, a big triple-cylinder muscle sled, and it carried the Mach Z name. And the timing of this was wild. Polaris had just launched their XLT 580, Yamaha unveiled the VMAX 4, and Arctic-Cat dropped the Thundercat 900. Practically overnight, every brand released a heavyweight triple, and Ski-Doo was right there in the fight. Early Mach Zs were pretty rare. Most dealers got only 1 or 2 units, and they were rushed to market under pressure from customers. It was built quickly, but it was a clean sheet design, new chassis, new suspension, new engine, and a fresh look. Sitting beside the Formula MX in the lineup, the Mach Z instantly claimed the sort of halo spot for the company. Perhaps the standout feature was this sled's frame. Instead of the typical steel frame, this one had an all-aluminum chassis, a first for a production snowmobile, and years ahead of its time. As much as the insane two-stroke power was important, this frame was really what made the Mach Z stand out, in that it made it lighter and more agile than most of the competitors. And so Ski-Doo was now offering a 140-ish horsepower sled that still only weighed a little over 500 pounds. Truly manic stuff. This was like the Quadzilla of the snowmobile world. That same year, riders wanted more suspension travel for rougher trails, and the new setup delivered. It offered smoother rides and better control, and people went nuts to get their hands on the Mach Z. But these were quite limited. Now, one of the problems with a massive increase in power and displacement is that often the rest of the machine isn't able to handle that power. We've seen this quite a bit in the two-wheeled industry, in particular with another Mach-named machine. So the early Mach Z, it did have its problems. In particular, Ski-Doo had spec'd a Comet clutch for the Mach Z, but it couldn't handle the triple's power, so this led to recalls, and by the next season they'd swapped it for their own TRA clutch, which became the standard going forward. Despite some early teething problems, customer enthusiasm was through the roof. Demand was so high that some buyers literally kissed their sled when they picked it up. By '95, the Mach Z had matured, all of the early flaws were gone, and now the sled had the reputation as probably the best in the industry. By the mid-1990s, some estimates placed the Rotax triple at nearly 150 horsepower, staggering output for this era, and enough to put Ski-Doo really toe-to-toe with the fastest machines. Over the next few years, Ski-Doo really polished this package. They reworked the chassis, improved suspension systems, and by 1995 and 96, the Mach Z was known as not just a powerhouse, but really a dependable sled. Riders lined up to buy them. These mid-90s models are often remembered as the machines that really etched the Mach Z into snowmobile history. Fast, aggressive, and also rare. Now, a turning point came in '97 when the Mach Z moved to the S2000 chassis and welcomed an 800cc triple. Enthusiasts had been begging for more displacement, and so Ski-Doo answered. Along with this new engine came the SC10 rear suspension, which dramatically improved comfort and control. The Mach Z was still a heavyweight, but it now absorbed bumps more effectively, and it gave riders more adjustability in terms of weight transfer, whether you were racing in a straight line or going out on the trails. In '98, the transformation continued as the Mach Z migrated to the CK3 chassis. This was really a ground-up redesign, a new frame, new suspension, new ergonomics. The sled was broader, more stable, and clearly engineered for big horsepower. Early models had some issues, especially with wiring harness problems, but Ski-Doo corrected these by '99. And by the decade's end, the Mach Z was really an absolute brute. Ski-Doo had firmly planted its flag in the triple-cylinder wars, a 100-plus mile-per-hour monster. This was a ridiculous machine. Any of you guys who had one of these, let us know in the comments what these were like. And also, this was really the peak of, you could say, the horsepower wars for snowmobiles, but as fun as these eras are for power sports, they usually come with a price. When you hand ordinary riders machines capable of triple-digit speeds on snow, it doesn't take long before somebody finds out just how fast they'll go, and there are consequences. By the late 90s, frozen lake racing had become a phenomenon in northern states and across Canada. Riders would line up side by side, hammer the throttle, and see who could stretch their Mach Z or Thundercat or VMAX 4 the furthest across the ice. It was like grassroots drag racing, no official sanctioning, just insanity. Now, it looked amazing, but it was also deadly. Ice conditions are unpredictable, visibility was poor, and the sleds themselves had braking systems that weren't necessarily designed for stopping quickly from 100 miles per hour. And so a mistake at those speeds usually meant catastrophe. Throughout the 90s, snowmobile deaths rose noticeably, with speed listed as really the leading cause for both the US and also Canadian reports. Local newspapers would often carry stories of riders who crashed on lakes or trails after pushing these machines way beyond their limits. Public outcry grew, particularly from community leaders in rural areas where sledding was becoming a way of life. In response to rising accidents, some regions began tightening snowmobile rules. Training courses and operator license were introduced for younger riders. Minimum age requirements became more common, and enforcement around specifically alcohol use on the trails grew stricter. A few jurisdictions also experimented with speed limits on designated trails. While not a sweeping ban like what happened with three-wheeled ATVs, these measures really did reflect growing concerns about the dangers of these increasingly powerful snowmobiles. There were also discussions in several northern states and provinces about whether the industry itself should be held accountable for producing machines that could easily go 100 miles per hour on snow. Unlike the three-wheelers of the 80s, high-horsepower snowmobiles were never banned outright. Instead, pressure came from insurance companies, snowmobile clubs, and lawmakers who focused on rider education and enforcement rather than prohibiting certain machines entirely. Still, the headlines took their toll. The muscle sleds like the Mach Z gained a reputation as dangerous, straight-line missiles that were thrilling but really unforgiving, and by the early 2000s, the performance arms race had really shifted. Instead of chasing bigger, faster, more powerful triples, manufacturers started prioritizing things like control and balance and rider-forward ergonomics. Ski-Doo's REV chassis in 2003 was really a clear example of this. This was a sled that didn't just go fast in a straight line, it also gave riders the ability to handle that speed a little more safely. The year 2000 brought about the Millennium Mach Z, a kind of collector's piece in the Mach Z lineup. Chrome everywhere, and each unit carried a numbered plaque. As Y2K approached, many riders expected every manufacturer to roll out something special, and in the end, Ski-Doo was really the only one that delivered, and that's why the Millennium Mach Z does stand out today as kind of a rare mix of muscle, flash, and also exclusivity. The Mach Z did carry into the early 2000s with some added features like electronic reverse, adjustable handlebars, and it still pumped out close to 150 horsepower. But by 2001 and 2002, the market started moving towards lighter, more agile twin-cylinder sleds with better power-to-weight ratios, sharper handling, and easier manners at speed, kind of like sport snowmobiles versus these muscle sleds. Against this backdrop, the big triples started to look outdated, and so 2003 really marked the end of the original Mach Z line. Now, few thought that the Mach Z would ever return. The market had essentially left this formula, but in 2005, Ski-Doo stunned the market with a revival. This sled was built on the RT chassis and powered by a massive 1000cc twin, producing roughly 170 horsepower. Now this made it sit at the very top in terms of performance for snowmobiles at this time. And also thanks to counterbalancers, it was also surprisingly smooth for such a giant motor. Though still a bulky machine, the RT platform centralized the riding position, giving it more balance and control than its predecessors, and riders went crazy for this. The Mach Z came in several flavors, including the X package with upgraded suspension. These RT models are revered as kind of the last over-the-top muscle sleds that Ski-Doo ever produced. But by 2008, the writing was on the wall, sales slumped, only around 750 units were made in that second year, then barely 500 in the final season. Most riders had shifted to lighter, more versatile twin-cylinder sleds, and so Ski-Doo officially pulled the plug, and the Mach Z was gone once again. Years passed with no revival of the Mach Z name, but then in 2022, BRP shocked the snowmobile world by reviving the Mach Z name for one more run. It was offered as a one-year-only limited edition, powered by the 900 Ace Turbo R 4-stroke with 180 horsepower on tap, and this became Ski-Doo's most powerful production snowmobile ever. This sled had things like launch control, smart shock electronic suspension. It was equal parts muscle and refinement. Seasoned riders who were nostalgic for old Mach Zs bought it, and also younger riders that wanted to experience that legend that they'd only really heard about. Now, for fans of snowmobiling and especially performance sledding, the Mach Z is really an icon, and I think its story is appealing because it is kind of an underdog story. Ski-Doo was not really known as a maker of performance sleds. They were a pioneer of recreational snowmobiling in general, having essentially built the hobby, but the 583 twin of the late 80s, and then all of these crazy triples and twins, they represent a company stepping out of its norm to make something truly special. I know many of you watching this video have had experience with these machines, and we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Ride safe.